Hi everybody, it's Susan from Sunrise Quilt Studio. Today I have another vintage quilt block for you. This one is called The Broken Wheel. This is one that was requested by a viewer. One of the quilts that my mother-in-law made that I showed on my video was made with the Broken Wheel block. So this is the block that she had, and so I want to show you how to make this one. Now this is a fairly easy block to make. As you can see here, it doesn't take very many pieces. For the pattern pieces A and B, for A you need 4 pieces that are 4.5 by 2.5. For B you need 16 pieces that are 2.5 inches square. For C, which is a background, you need 5 pieces that are 4.5 inches square, and you need 4 pieces that are 4.5 by 2.5. So we're going to make 2 patch units using A and D, then we're going to make square and square units using C and B. So we're going to start with the easiest one here, and this is the 2 patch, and we're just going to sew these right sides together right along this seam line using a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, as always I'm using a 50 weight thread in my needle and in my bobbin, and we're just going to sew the D and the A pieces together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we're going to put those right sides together, and I'm just going to chain piece them. So that means I'm not going to cut the threads between the pieces. I'm just going to sew one right after the other. And I have my stitch length at 2.0. So this is a beginner-friendly block, so if you've been a little hesitant to try some of these blocks because of the techniques in them, I think this is one that you could do real easily. Now I'm going to cut them apart, and then I'm going to press towards the darker fabric. So I'm just going to lay them out, press them flat, and then press open towards the darker fabric. Now the fabric for this block isn't as high contrast as my sample block was. So this is one that you can do however you want as far as color and contrast. In my mother-in-law's quilt, she used a lot of prints in her blocks. A lot of the blocks had 2 prints in them instead of a print and a solid, so you can do that too. And she also switched the colors as far as where I am using white for a background, she would use a darker color, and then she'd use a lighter color where I am using my print here. So you can do this however you want. So here are those blocks. I'm going to set them aside, and now I'm going to work on the C and the B squares. There are a couple of ways that you can do this. If you want, you can take these B squares, draw a diagonal line from one corner to the opposite corner on every one of these, or you can use a seam guide, or you could use, there is foundation paper for half square triangles. You need the ones that will give you a 4.5 inch unfinished square or a 4 inch finished square. So I'm going to use a seam guide, so I'm going to adjust the camera and show you that. Now one of these squares you're going to set aside. You're going to set one of these aside and use it as the center of the block. The other 4 you're going to make square and square units. So we're going to take one of the squares, the smaller squares, and place it in the corner right here, and then I'm going to sew from the corner here to the corner here. So I'm going to line up my needle with that point I'm going to take a few stitches, and then I'm going to line up this point with my tape right here. You can see right here, this is lined up right there, and then I'm going to keep that lined up to my tape as I go. So this piece of tape, this is glow line tape, and it comes in several different colors. I have yellow, pink, and orange, so it doesn't matter what color you use. And it's lined up, this side is lined up with my needle, just pulled it straight down. And there are commercial seam guides that you can buy and use them. I'm going to show you how I do one full square first, and then I'll chain piece the others together. So I'm going to flip this around and do the opposite corner the same way. Anyway, I'm going to place this square on this corner and just do the same thing. Go from this point to this point here. Okay, now it's time to trim. So I'm going to trim off my threads. Then I'm going to trim off this outer triangle. And I'm just going to use my scissors. You can use a rotary cutter if you want to. And if you want to save these pieces, if you like doing really tiny projects, you know, you can save these triangles for something. And now I'm going to press these open so that it will look like this. So I'm going to press them towards the darker fabric. So we have this. Now I'm going to sew the opposite two corners on, the other two corners. And do it the exact same way. Okay, then turn it around and do the opposite corner. Okay, so now I have this. I'm going to trim off the outer corners. Like this, and then I'm going to press open and I'll have my square and a square unit. Okay, so here's the square and a square unit. I'm going to make 4 of these. So now I'm going to start chain piecing them to save time, and I'll be doing just one corner at a time. So there's one. Okay, for me it's easier to clip these apart and keep on sewing the other side. But if you can sew these with them chained together, that is fine. Just do what works for you. Okay, so I have these 3 done with 2 corners, and I need to trim the outer triangles off. Okay. I'm going to press. And now I'll do the opposite corners. So I'm going to do that with all of them. Just press them open. Okay, now we're ready to lay out the block. Okay, now we need to lay out the block and sew it together in rows. So I have my square and a square units, I have my 2 patch units, and my center. So I'm going to start in the center and take my 2 patches made with the rectangles and put one on each side with the print fabric towards the white, towards the center here. And then I'm going to put a square in the square unit in each corner. And here we have the broken wheel block. So I'm going to sew it together in rows and then sew all the rows together. Okay, so I'm going to chain piece these together. I'm going to sew the first 2 units of each row, and on these I'm going to flip it so that I can see the point. There is a point here on the square and a square unit. I want it to line up with the seam. So let me line these blocks up, and I'm going to take a pin and poke it through right there where the point is, and then make sure it goes through the seam. I can move the fabric so that I can see it. There we go. And then line my needed to pull that up just a bit. Another thing you can do is just pull this back and make sure that your point is lined up with your seam right there. But I am going to pin that so that it doesn't shift on me. And then I don't want to cut off that point, so I'm going to stitch just barely on the outer side of that point, so within the seam allowance, by like a thread or 2. It's not very much. Okay, the next 2 pieces don't have any points to match, so I'm just going to zip them on through. And then the last two pieces are the same. I need to make sure, or do my best to make sure that point is lined up with the seam. Got the first two pieces of each row done, and I'm going to lay them back in place on my cutting mat here, on my ironing mat actually, so that I don't get them mixed up. I don't want to sew the wrong piece on. And then we'll sew on the last unit to each row. And do the same thing with matching points. Okay, and then row 2. Row 3. All right, now let's cut them apart. We'll lay them back out. Okay, now I'm going to press my seams away from the points. That gives me the best look. So I'll be pressing these seams in towards the center on the top and the bottom row. Here is row 1. Let me zoom out so you can see. Okay, this is row 1. And I think the points look really good, so I'm happy with that. And the seams are pressed towards the center. So I will press the bottom row the same way. The center row we're going to press towards the outer pieces. So here's row 2, and it is pressed out. And then row 3 will be pressed in like this. Row 3 is pressed in. And now I'm going to sew these rows together. So I'm going to start with 1 and 2, and I'm going to nest my seams, put on my pin cushion. And I get a lot of questions about my pin cushion. This is a Fons and Porter pin cushion, so wherever you can find Fons and Porter products, you should be able to find this. I bought this at Joann's years ago, but I think they still have it. Okay, so here's rows 1 and 2, and I need to match points here and here. So you do have points to match on this block. Otherwise, it is fairly easy to do. It just takes you a little time to get your points matched up. Okay, so here is the block. Just took it off of the machine, and it's ready to be pressed. And when I flip this over, you can see how I've pressed everything away from the points. So I'm going to do the same thing here, even though these look like they want to go towards the point, at least on that one. But I'm going to press everything away from the points because it makes your points show up a little bit better. So let's do that for this block. So we'll be pressing towards the center. You can also press your seams open if you want. Now if you're worried that your block doesn't lay flat enough, you can use steam. You can also starch, and you can use clappers if you own clappers. I don't have any. But I find just giving a good press helps make everything lay flat. So here we go. So there is the broken wheel block. So when you're doing your placement of your units, just make sure that you are forming a circle here in the center. So what could mess you up is getting these units here flipped around. If you get them turned so that the background is towards the center, you're going to have a completely different looking block. Not that that's a bad thing, it's just not a broken wheel block. It would be something else. So there we go. There is the broken wheel block. Okay, so that is it for the broken wheel block. Here is the one that I made here on the video, and here is my sample. This is made with higher contrasting fabric, so you get, different looks. There we go. So you can get different looks depending on the fabrics that you use. Now in my mother-in-law's quilt, which I'll have a picture for you to see, she placed hers on point. All of her blocks were placed on point instead of square in a straight set, and so it looks completely different. And you'll notice that she used 2 different prints as opposed to a print and a solid. So there are lots of different ways to make this block, and you can use more than one print in the main part of the block. So here, these are all, there's just 2 fabrics that I used here, but if you want to use a different fabric for like the 3 outer triangles, you could do that. You could use a different fabric for these squares here. Try a bunch of different things and see what you like. You come up with a different look for your broken wheel block, and I think it could be pretty interesting. So I really like this one. I can see the design really well. I can see where it gets the name broken wheel. This one is a softer look, but you can still see kind of the spokes coming out of the wheel. So I like, the triangles kind of look like the spokes to me. Anyway, that's my opinion. So I hope you liked this video, and if you did, please click that like button. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and click that notification bell so you'll be notified when the next video comes up. And in the meantime, I hope you're all staying safe and healthy, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. For more quilting ideas, click on the video links, and to keep up with my latest projects, click on the subscribe button. I hope to see you again soon.